Mark my words, Mark. I have another gig for you. We're working on some promos for the Lugnuts Season 2 premiere. It's that show on Wrench TV with the two goofy co-hosts who drive around in old cars and talk shop. We did a shoot with the talent on a stage, and the spots have already been edited for you. What we need is a visual effects wizard, that's you, to help us dial in the composite and to get everything to look nice and pretty. The artwork has a very unique style to it, so you may have to finagle things a bit to get the talent to really sit in that environment, but I know that you're up to it. We're going to have you do the daytime spot in this campaign, and we'll hire that lesser-known, cheaper artist that you referred to us for the nighttime spot. Thanks!
All right, don't listen to what clients say. I'm going to do my best with the shot, but you guys are going to kill it. All right, pay no attention to what clients say about you. They don't know what they're talking about. Here is the cut. Let's just take a look.
Hey, Tracy. What'd the bartender say to the jumper cable?
I couldn't possibly imagine.
I'll get you a drink. Just don't start anything.
Get ready, gearheads. Season 2 of the Lugnuts premieres October 28th, only on Wrench TV.
There you have it, a 20-second spot with 3 clips on green screen. And that's about all that's in here. The rest of the elements are going to be found in Photoshop. So let's just take a look at that. Here is our background. And this is a beautiful piece of artwork, which we'll get a closer look at once we're in the project. Just the basic organization here. We have a background landscape, some elements that are meant to be in the middle ground, and then these foreground elements. And I think the idea with this wide format is obviously that this is going to be scrolling by, I'll date myself and say Flintstones or Hanna-Barbera style, with the elements just repeating. It's going to look great. And there is also an end card, so this is what the client wants the final shot to look like. Cool, looks like a piece of cake. Here is that same cut in After Effects. It's very simple. And a couple things to point out before we get started. We're defaulting to timecode here, which actually might be just fine. For something like a spot, you're often going to refer with your client to specific seconds and even frames. So that works for me. And these R3Ds need a little bit of love in terms of having useless titles and probably once again also having bogus start time code. So I'm just going to set this to 0 once again. You've seen me do this before. Copy that interpretation and paste it to the others. Doing it with the menu just so you see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to rename these. So this one we'll just call 2-shot MCU, and then this final one will be the wide. And as you can see, when I rename them in the project, they're renamed in the timeline, just in case you never came across that before. Now you may find that these R3D files are a little rough to work with on an older machine, a little slower. So if that's the case, make sure you watch the short bonus video on how to set up proxies. So the first step is going to be to just pull some quick keys on these and see how they look. And even without trying, I can tell that this is going to be the most straightforward shot. So we'll start with this one. What are the issues here? Well, on the positive side, it looks like it was really well shot. There is incredible detail in this hair, which we want to preserve. She is blonde, which theoretically is a challenge, although I'd say blonde against blue is even a bigger challenge than against green. There's some soft focus behind her, so we've got shallow depth of field, which is great, and so there's some nice blurring on the edges here, which again will preserve that. And it looks like there's going to be some green spill, so let's just see what happens if I fire up key light. So once again, I'm going to switch to my keying layout that I already made for myself. And the process is as you've seen before. And again, I'm really mostly being mindful of where we get good hair detail. So it doesn't look like there's any perfect place for the background, but that's pretty good. And remember, all this out here really doesn't matter at all. Find our screen balance setting. Great. And now what I want to do in intermediate view is just have the lightest possible touch on this mat. In fact, I hesitate to adjust it at all, but let's just focus again on just her hair right now. Forget about the car or anything else. So this is kind of amazing, but you can see her eyes there. What I don't want to do is raise clip black, but I'm free to come down a little bit in the white because it's just going to emphasize that hair detail. And that knocks out most of what I'm seeing with the eyes. Undo, redo. So I'm inclined to make no adjustment whatsoever. So let's just leave it right at clip black and clip white, which honestly is us living in a completely ideal world. So that is the beauty of well-shot footage. Now, having done that, there's a couple other things we do need to do. So looking at the mat, I'm going to go ahead and just select just the talent. And let's hit a little preview here. So let's see if she's going outside my mask and evaluate the mat. Looks amazing. So the good news is, right off the bat, this is going to be an amazing shot. So what you're seeing here is a pretty ideal matte situation. We probably could have, should have monkey wrenched it a little bit to make it worse. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, the truth is, this is what you're always aspiring to. If you don't need to touch clip black and clip white, that means you have an extremely well shot and also well garbage matted element. We couldn't do this for the whole shot, mind you. But the fact that the hair, which is the most crucial fine detail, is working with such a light touch means we've got a good shot at getting a great looking matte on this. That obviously is leaving a lot of foreground. Let's just see how close we can even get. Well, it could be worse. So gently, let's see if I can coax a little more solidity into this foreground. Go down to about 85, not bad. And then in the background, I already know I don't want to try to fix things like that with these controls, but actually they clean up all right. Switch to intermediate. Look at the matte. And let's preview that one. So obviously there are a few issues, but really not that bad. The sunglasses are a thing. Her hair is a thing. Now let's just switch out of alpha view and take a look. My concern is that the hair is just going to get clumpy, especially when she's in soft focus. So we have a rack focus from him to her. You see that here? And when she's in soft focus, if all of her edge detail kind of clumps up like that, that key's not going to look very good. What is the number one thing to remember here? The only things that really matter in this key are her hair and his face. Everything else is part of a hard body, a solid object that doesn't actually technically need to be keyed at all. It could be handled with roto instead without a huge amount of problem. I'm not saying we have to go there, but if the spill were a lot worse, let's say the entire interior of the car had green spill, which I've seen before, then I would immediately just focus on those two areas I was talking about and handle everything by breaking it apart into masked areas. So we'll see how that goes. As for this end shot, I can tell you right off the bat, this is a completely different deal. But let's go ahead and just get a key off of it anyway, just to see what's going on. Now, where do I even select my background color? I mean, I get a lot if I go down on the floor here. We'll just start with that. Probably not the best for the edges, but case you haven't figured it out already, I'm not planning on getting all this in one keying pass. So what you can see in status view here is there is actually some pretty nice differentiation in the windows of the car. Obviously there's some spill around other areas of the car. The shadows are kind of a situation, including the talent floor. But the upper part of the talent also looks fairly promising. And for whatever reason, even though in costume they probably carefully avoided putting talent in anything green, those blue jeans and even her black pants seem to be picking up a lot of the background. So even if I go to screen mat and bring down the white, you can see that just his jeans are gonna be kind of an issue. Now this is a good example. When I did that, notice what happened just to the detail in the windows. So this is clearly a case where you have no choice but to break this apart, not to mention all the garbage matting that's going to be done to just get rid of what just plain doesn't belong. Okay, well, if I haven't said it before, the big motivation to give you a shot with a car in it, partly that's really cool. It's great to have a car shot, right? But also, it's to throw a bunch of things at you that basically can distract you from the work. Now, there are nightmare keying scenarios where you have to key a bunch of stuff that is shiny and transparent and reflective and all that. But in this case, I'm giving you the cheat code where what you're actually going to do is remove more than 90% of that. You're just going to take it off the table and never actually try to key it at all. I went ahead and made a pre-comp for this MCU shot, left the scale in the main comp, but moved key light to the pre. So this will be my edge. And now we're going to want to add a core to take care of these little tiny holes in the mat, including, remember, her eyes. And I'm not going to do that with key light. I am going to do it with roto, but the roto in this case is really simple, and what we're taking advantage of is the fact that this is what you call a hard surface object, the car, and theoretically it should all be moving as one. So really I'm just making a mask of two windows along the edges, and just to study my mat for a moment, I like what I'm getting in terms of the softness along the windows, so it's just filling in those holes. So let's go back to our good friend Mocha. And I'll just start from the beginning. Now, where to track? So I'm just going to make a track that's going to apply to the entire scene. Let's see how much she's moving, just her hair and so on. So this kind of motion is going to confuse Mocha because it's very literal about what's inside any mask you draw. So instead I'm going to just make my mask down here, outside of kind of where that's happening, and we'll call this track, and let's see what happens. Well, it looks like there were some issues there. So to know for sure, let me go ahead and just disable and turn off that mask, and let's make my core matte. I'll zoom out just a hint, and this is going to be a loose mask around the foreground, but avoiding all the edges. And yes, I'm even going to go ahead and scoop up the eyes. That sounded gross. I didn't mean literally scoop up the eyes. Make a few extra points in here, like so, down to there. Don't want to go too close to the edge, just get all that green spill down here. And of course this is all adjustable. We'll start with that. I'm never going to track this, so this is just the matte. And then in its layer properties, I will link it to the track. And let's see how that's working. So it's not working very well. And the reason for that is the interactive lighting. So these lights that are passing across the scene are messing with it. No fear, we just need to give Mocha more data. So turn those back on for the layer. And let's use the ability to add to the original shape with the X plus tool here, and I'll just draw another one back here. Again, avoiding her movement. And then I'll draw a third one. Now I'm concerned about anytime I'm tracking a glare, I don't like doing that. So I'm going to aim for the upper part of this right here. I still have my X plus tool. Let's see if I can. Okay, I need to select it again and the layer again. And I'm just going to avoid where that glare is. And the reason for that, anytime you're tracking, if you track something that's just purely reflected light, you get into trouble. Now I went inside of the boundaries here, but actually it'd probably be better to go outside. And that might even be the case for these other masks as well. So actually the mindset is hard to get around, that I don't need to stay inside the boundaries just because that's where my mask is going. So I feel like this is going to work a lot better. Let's find out. So I didn't undo my previous track, I'm just overwriting it. It's going to go a bit more slowly this time because it's just tracking more areas. And now let's just turn that off and take a look at what we got. All right, that's looking a lot better, and it looks like what I just didn't do was kind of refine my original roto here. So this was kind of a gap the whole time. And I can go to the inside of that edge, because again, I like the edge. The issue was with some holes in the matte. So this is not a very delicate matte that I'm dealing with here. Let's make sure this is probably going to be the hardest point right down here, because the reflection goes all the way across and very near the edge. Let's just carefully look at that. Well, it's staying within the bounds everywhere. Her eyes are within this mask up until she turns her head, where it's no longer an issue. I call it good. By closing Mocha, I get the save option, make sure to save, and let's enable that core layer. And then this time I'm going to apply it as a matte. So I don't need to make any masks in this case, because motion blur is not a thing and adjusting the edge is not a thing. Let's see if that works out. Looks like I missed a little bit there. There's a little bit of an issue right there. I'm going to go back to the keyframe, because this is not something I actually am trying to animate. So just to be clear about that, I went back to where my first shape was drawn in order that it not animate this matte. I'm going to go really close to the edge here. And let's see if that stays in bounds. Yep. And again, remember the magician's rule, there better not be anybody actually looking down here, or our entire project is probably trash. Okay, so save that. It updated automatically. That looks good. And let's admire our masterwork. Yep, so nitpicking, we are losing a little edge softness there, and I just am not going to let that bother me. So it's looking to me like we have 3 different types of shot in this exercise, or rather in this lesson, and hopefully the exercise will be similar, where there's this shot that really is all about keying finesse. Then there's the prior shot, which is going to be a combo of keying finesse and some grunt work separating things out. And then we have the final shot that's going to be a lot of grunt work. So I haven't even added the background yet. And rather than do that now, let's suppose we didn't have the background yet. And all we know is that it's kind of bright orange yellow. Well, as you know, in comp settings, I can change the background color. And so I can choose something that is that kind of saturated. I'll go with a brighter color. And I can even do this interactively, so I can look for the color that's really going to show the flaws with my foreground. So there are a couple different ways you can use this. You can choose something that approximates what your actual background is going to be. That's a good way to go. Another way to do it is just choose the thing that is the most opposite of your foreground and your matte color, which we're actually kind of close to that as well. If you look at the color wheel, orange is not the absolute opposite of green, and of course we all know red is the true color opposite, but I think orange is showing it just as well in terms of certainly where there's green spill, and well, let's just take a look and see what we see. Okay, well at this point let's add a little spill correction and see what that gets us. Go ahead and set this to ultra. And that improved. Notice at standard, there's some dark edges, which even just ultra at the default is doing a better job removing. So that was useful to know. What we've set up here is effectively a worst case scenario. Imagine that the background were actually just a static, very bright background, and you can see that we'd be doing pretty darn well. Even the tiniest little hair details are holding up without any chatter or kind of appearing and disappearing very much at all. Amazing. I hope you like the color orange. Using a contrasting color like this doesn't have to be orange, but it's often something even worse like pink. It helps you really clearly see fine detail that needs adjusting. Stuff that you could probably honestly get away with and not see over the actual background. But especially while you're learning, I really recommend this, and even when you're not, because sometimes you miss something, especially with a detailed background like we have here, and this is a way to ensure against that. We knew about the problem with the sunglasses. Ironically, they look pretty good because they are reflecting green, and so reflecting orange looks just as natural here. Similarly, some other things like the reflection on the back of the seat look fine, right? She doesn't look so hot. Now, having said that, once you've developed a discerning eye for this stuff in particular, you're going to see these kind of keys around. And I'm not just talking that they're the result of key light or After Effects. You get the same result working in Nuke, which, remember, key light is a foundry tool, so basically the same keyer. And it's really more a question of how much trouble was taken to get it right. So I maintain the essential areas are around her hair, and then his sunglasses, and let's just take a look. His hair looks okay. And other than that, I am dealing with hard surfaces, which even now are holding up remarkably well. Where there are holes, those are going to be a problem. Once there's a moving background, that would really look bad when you see things moving under there. But remember, there are very few holes, and they're pretty minor. Once again, I've pre-comped and moved key light into this comp. So just to remind, we have a really good matte, but I'm going to call this one the main matte because we don't actually want to use it for what really counts, which is the talent. I'll just turn it off for now. And let's just focus on her matte. Now remember, this footage is 5K. So right now, I'm not even at 100% yet. And there's a lot of detail in here. So I'm not so concerned about wispy hair this time, but let's just see what happens if I draw kind of a mask. Like that. Looks good, and I'm gonna stop when she's in focus and just try to get a good matte for this part. Now I could break this into multiple layers, but let's just try this with a new instance of key light. We need an in-between scale. Presumably some color right around her is what we want to choose. Let's see if that turns out to be true. That looks pretty good. Find our screen balance. Probably the same as in the master shot. And then let's see how well we can do without touching it. So in status view, it's easy to see things that are not so easy to see when you're actually looking at the matte. And although I love status view for giving me this clear overview, if I just play through a few frames here, I can see that this is a very, what you would call a quiet matte. If there is any noise happening in the foreground or background, it's pretty minor. I'm not going to worry about anything I see that's not near the edges. Again, her eyes look like they're showing up, as again is some noise along here. But I'm really just concerned about the edges, and they're looking really good. So at most, let's just go back. One thing you can do in status view, and not with the alpha channel on, is just creep a little bit. So sometimes those little barely opaque pixels will still come back and get you. So I'm just solidifying the background a little bit. I came up to 3 and the foreground a little bit. And again, I'm not going to go very far there either. I'm just looking at that stuff that was going on at the top here. And I think that's really good. Yeah, I think it's really good. So this one's going to be called Key Light Her. And once again, I can go to the effects and just apply that matte. So the key light's only happening, that key light is only happening there, and I should probably rename the mask itself. Okay, and now having done that, let's also look at the main key light. Now I can't subtract a matte with this feature, so in fact, what I could do is invert it separately and make that the main matte. I may want to also break this down further, but for now, let's just go with this. And if I re-enable key light, oh, I need to invert main. There we go. And let me just hide the mask. Okay. So she was my biggest concern. And now I'm going to add a fill matte, a core matte, and I'll just use the exact same settings. So call this one edge, this one core. Now notice that all but a couple of the holes are already filled in just by doubling it up. Now that means the edges are doubled up too, so we do have to back off, but there's a little bit of a hole here. There's still his sunglasses. There's something going on over here. There's a little noise there. Pretty minor stuff. And I never even added any matte tools to this. So for example, in the edge, I'm going to go ahead and add key cleaner. Let's turn off the core as well and just see what key cleaner does. So that's going to soften some of that, and that's at the default. Let's make sure we're happy with the default. That's not a very attractive still frame. And yeah, I'm zoomed right in on the edges, but that is how you evaluate, and that is going to be just fine, even at the default radius of 10. If I see anything wrong, I can certainly fix it later. And then for the core, let's actually apply the same effect there, and let's see what we can do with that. I don't need this open anymore. I'm looking at the two of them together because the core only matters to the extent that it makes a difference in the edge. Now if I raise the radius quite a bit, it's not plugging those holes. In fact, they're getting worse. What if I go down? It's about the same. So in fact, the default setting, as is often the case, is pretty good. So now let's see what happens if I choke the mat. Now if I just straight up choke it, as we know, the holes like that one will get bigger. These as well, that's getting worse as well. So this is a case where maybe a spread before a choke is going to help. Now the spread mat is obviously a disaster. The edges are destroyed. So this has to be done with a careful eye to what is actually happening. But you can call this one spread and then duplicate it, call this one choke, and choke is going to choke quite a lot. And then we're just going to study these edges and see. Okay, that needs to be choked a lot more. And we may also have to hold it out from certain areas where it's not really needed. So basically right now I don't like what it's doing here, and remember she's in focus right now, so this is out and there's a lot of blur, and by this I mean this element here. So getting all this extra grunge, right? Don't want it. And I'd have to choke so far to pull that in. I mean, it's still not even helping. See, that's still sticking out there. I admit it, this is noodling. In my defense, we're trying to avoid something even more tedious, which is further isolation of elements. Keying is kind of noodly. The dirty truth, not really a secret about keying, is that it's not really automatic. You end up having to do quite a bit of fine adjustment. It sounds really great to have the computer just do it for you, and it's doing an okay job, but it needs your help, and that gets kind of noodly. In a case like this, I would want to see what happens if I go back here and take the mat that I had around her and just one point at a time. I'm going to basically make it include the areas that are currently problematic, which extend from this front pillar here to his face. And it may be that I'm not going to get away with it being a still mask, but let's see. I can copy the mask path, paste it there. In fact, I could even make an expression and join them together. And that way, any other changes I need to make to it will apply to both. Okay, so the core is off, and I am going to need to make that same holdout apply to the core. I might as well do that now. I'll just take away this main one, and again, just tie this mask to the other one and call that holdout and invert it. So now, theoretically, I can turn on that core mask and not affect this, but that is not happening because I have it tied to an effect. And this is how complicated things can get at this stage. So let's take that out. And in fact, the key light on her doesn't really matter anymore, so I can just take that out as well. Now we are good, at least for this frame. So now let's see what happens over the entire clip. That is a damn fine looking matte. I see an issue here, which we knew about. The sunglasses, which we knew about. This odd, whatever this is, going on down here. And what I now realize is the side view mirror over here. If I switch back to full color, you can see it doesn't look like much, but it corresponds to this one. And the reason it looks like that is, in fact, that it's reflecting. So what you're learning here is that breaking apart the key is essential to making it good. And I have isolated now 3 areas only that are going to need a little bit of direct work. I'm going to use Mocha for it. So I'm not going to keep trying to key stuff that I can solve with a good mask instead. Now, because you and I have spent our time already doing roto in Mocha, I don't feel the need to go step by step with it. So now we're going to skip ahead again to where you'll see the masks that I've attached to the tracks I just made. You can see the effectiveness of this approach with one exception, which I could not work around. So this over here, when the light passes over, there are slight little hiccups happening, which I will just take care of in After Effects in the timeline. This one looks great. It does change its shape, but because I could place it wherever I want, it's staying outside of the mirror area, holding this curve here, and not extending outside of these 2 borders here. So that's great. Using the nose for the eyes is really the only one I couldn't figure out how to improve upon. So if I put a grid over what I'm using for the eyes and play it, you can see that the plane matches that of the nose, and so it's sort of perpendicular to the glasses. And again, this is not 3D tracking. And the result of that is that I'm going to have to go in and roto, kind of set some keyframes, which is a lot easier than doing this all by hand. But I don't want this mask to extend out into the green screen, because if I key within this mask, then I'm keying out holes again, right? So let's go to the keyframe I already have set, and let's just do some more keyframing. What you're seeing here at high speed is me tracking the nose and then tweaking the mask that's linked to the nose so that it just holds out those reflections in the glasses. Now, because those change from frame to frame, there's no way I can track just them. And the nose is a thing that is very consistent throughout the shot. So I turned off the tracking mats, saved, closed, and in the Mocha effect applied the matte. And now I've looped up a preview at half res, and a full 4K preview takes, even on a fast machine, like longer than it took me to do all that roto just to review and watch. And this is giving me a good enough idea here. And I can switch to the alpha channel, and we can see that around the sunglasses, things are working great. No problem there. Remember that the apply matte doesn't let me adjust feather or get any motion blur. So for these other 2 masks here at the seat one, I'm going to definitely need some softness there, and I'll look at whether those little hops that were in there are affecting that when I zoom in more closely. And then here I need just a little more softness there as well. So let's go ahead and turn that off, unapply the matte, and instead create some masks. And there they are. So just a little bit of housekeeping here. F reveals feather. And let's take a look at the matte while I do this. Now, I can't feather to the inside or outside using this control, but what I can do is combine it with matte expansion. So if I want to make it pretty soft and I want to have that softness extend over this curve, I can just contract the matte just a hint, and then I don't need as much feather. Okay, I think that's great. Mostly I just didn't want that one to look completely hard-edged. And similarly, this guy over here really needs to be kind of soft. I'm gonna guess that something like 10, 15 would help to turn off the mask control. So that's before. Yeah, that's looking a lot better, just like that. And again, just to take a look at the sunglasses, it's helpful to look right where they go along the edge there. And I mean, I think it's okay. I could feather it just a touch. Great. Now, incidentally, to take a look at whether this little matte hop is having an effect on the edge here, I'm just going to hold down the page down key. There's no easy way to kind of just preview a mask in motion, but this is giving me enough of an idea. And there are some teeny little hiccups in there, but I'm going to take a chance that nobody's going to know about that little 1 pixel wiggle when we're already inside the edge. Call me a rebel. I'm pretty sure you don't want to see me slack off on fine detail, and yet every bit of perfect, quote-unquote, roto has some slacking off in it. I pretty much can guarantee you that. And if not, then probably that artist should have stopped sooner. So let's move on, and let's move on to something really fun, which is working with the awesome background artwork that we've got. So there's a background, a middle ground, and a foreground. And this is ready to import as a comp. Now notice that I'm just looking at this at half res and I'm getting things timing out here. So it's worth asking, do I actually need these to be compositions, or should I go ahead and commit to the way the layers are laid out? And yes, it has now looped up in the entire timeline because it is just stills. But nonetheless, we're going to be animating these and doing some other stuff with them. So in fact, I think it may be better to convert them. We've just stumbled upon what I feel is one of the best pieces of advice I can give you, which is as you work, notice things that keeping your options open with them is costing you little bits of time, or maybe more than little bits of time. And notice that those add up, and all you have to do is make a decision to commit and then reduce them down to where they work faster without anybody noticing in the final result, and move on. You're never going to be stuck. You're still working on a computer and you can still change your mind later on, but it will save you a lot of time. Photoshop makes this easy. On any given layer, I just choose Quick Export as PNG, and that'll be perfect. I'll go up one level, call this Lug Nuts Day Layers, copy that, and make it part of the name. And let me just solo the foreground as well. That looks good. On the middle ground, I'm just going to spread things out a little bit more evenly, just because even in those old Hanna-Barbera cartoons, it would kind of bug me when things were clumped together. So let's take the horse, just kind of move him over there. We'll take this tree and move it over here. That looks better. We can take this one and just move it out a little bit more as well. Okay, don't want to be too even. Now we take the whole thing, click in the right place, and those are ready to be imported into After Effects. Now I know what you're thinking, Mark, I don't want to deal with these converted layers. I like just importing the Photoshop document as a comp and not worrying about it. Well, guess what? You can do the same thing with those layers we just created. There they are, and either within this folder or even one level up, I can just select it, choose all acceptable files, and with Create Composition checked, I get a second dialog. Now I'm going to want a single composition. I'm going to want the size to be made from the background, the largest of those 3 layers. Still duration right now is set in mine to 20. I think it defaults to 2. 20 is fine with me. This is a 20-second long entire spot. I'm not going to add to the render queue, and I'm not going to sequence layers. So if those are checked on, just uncheck them, and boom goes the dynamite. Middle ground is above foreground. We can fix that, and we are ready to move on to the next step. And that is going to be animating these layers for parallax. Now, I notice this foreground layer is not quite the full width of the comp, and we want it to be because of how I'm going to do this. So I'm going to use the shortcut Command Option Shift H to scale it to the width. G would scale it to height, and I'll move it down a little bit. And let's just start with this foreground layer. So to animate this, oh, and actually since I'm looking at my project panel, let's also move that into pre-comp. Good. So the way I'm going to do this is with a rather ancient effect. I have it highlighted over here, and it is called Motion Tile. Now notice, if you can see this, that this is an 8-bit effect. So when I apply it, I'm going to get a little warning icon over there. Well, guess what? It's no big deal. This is some of the most 8-bit art I've ever seen, deliberately so. If you don't know what I mean by that, let's just zoom in here. There are no gradients, which is the main reason you would need 16-bit. Well, I take that back. There are subtle gradients, but it is meant to look very much like old school pixel art, which is great. If Motion Tile gives you unpredictable render results compared to your previews, you can use the offset effect instead. Motion Tile, ancient. Offset, merely old. In any case, none of that do we need to worry about right now, so let's just move on. The way Motion Tile works is so simple. It's just going to prevent me from needing to do any overscaling of the comp or manual, repeating it, which then chokes After Effects by getting these huge, enormous layers. So it's doing something just dead simple. So I'll set an expression because I'm once again going to use time to animate this. And in here, I'm just going to type plus time times 4,000 for this front layer. And let's just preview that one alone. I'll shift 0 to get a fast working preview of that. We're at half res. And that's the basic idea. One thing I want to make sure of, let's just go all the way to the end here. Now it is stalling out. So one of the limitations of this ancient effect is it does have a limit for the value of 1, and I think it's the equivalent of something like, what would that be? 14 bits? I don't know. But it's right around 64,000. So the thing we didn't do was offset the initial value backwards, which we could easily do. I could give this a negative 60,000 value and then re-enable the expression, and done. And even if I go to the end, still moving. Okay, so that is a great starting point. And having done that, before I preview it all together, I would like to do the same for the midground layer, the exact same. In fact, I'll just copy the effect, paste it, EE reveals the expression, and the only difference here is the amount of parallax. So this goes, instead of 4,000, is going to be 2,000. When I commit that, and I have the same issue. This layer is not the correct size, so let's fix it. I need to move the foreground down just a bit. Now, the fine-tuning of how this is all going to work will happen in the actual assembly, but just to kind of get an idea right now, Let's find a happy starting point. Oh, and look at that. It's also tiling up and down, which is not what I want. Let's see if that is indeed what's happening. Yes, it is. So let me just check something here. All right, well, for whatever reason, on that layer, setting the effect, offset it, let's just check the foreground. And the foreground doesn't have that problem, as far as I can tell. Although that looks a little cut off. Let's just make sure. Nope, it's designed that way. I'm going to double check the artwork, but for now, all I really want to do is show you the effect of parallax. So I'm just getting an initial kind of comp look that I like, which really doesn't matter because it's all going to kind of change anyway. And now again, I'm going to shift 0 on the numerical keypad, and I had this one disabled, so now let's do both. Excellent, and they are facing left, so this is going in the correct direction. We're going to need a little bit of motion on the background as well. So let's get that one as well. I think I still have it on my pasteboard, yes. And let's just go ahead and make this one half again, and I can adjust this further later if the proportions look off. And I think the problem was that the default should be different given the different sizes of the layers. And so if I had set the effect from scratch, it would have made the default center correct. So that's why I'm having to adjust that. And that is looking pretty sweet. Before I put this into play, the other piece is going to be adding some depth of field. Now again, when I thought about doing this originally, I was thinking about, well, you know, maybe I should lay all these out in a 3D space and kill myself. No. Instead, what I will do is the foreground actually needs motion blur. That's probably all that needs. That one's going to be the closest to being in focus. Then for the midground, I could use something like, if I look at my blurs, I could use camera lens blur, which is very slow and adds bokeh, which I don't really need if you push it hard, and I'm not pushing it hard. So instead, I'm going to use the poor man's lens blur, which is fast box blur, and I will lower the number of iterations. Let me lower it to 1 and then blur these out a lot. And it's kind of a weird blur, right? But that's kind of the point. Camera blurs don't look like Gaussian blurs. So when you use Gaussian blur to stand in for camera blur, not only is it missing lens artifacts like bokeh, but it's also just not doing the stuff that a lens does. And this somehow is a little bit closer. Let me try 2 iterations. So that makes the effect more powerful, but it's still kind of cruder than a Gaussian. So maybe I'll use the 1 iteration look for the very background and 2 for this one. That's just kind of an arbitrary decision. And I'm just kind of doing the blur radius to taste. I think that will be fine. I can also turn on a little bit of motion blur on there. And then let's do the same for the background. This time using 1 iteration. And I don't want it to be so blurred out that I can't make out what's even back there. In fact, I think that middle ground now looks a little too blurry. If I make it 1 iteration versus 2, you can see that with 2 there's more blur. Well, maybe you could see that. In any case, this is all just me kind of guesstimating what I want the look of this to be. And the real proof is going to be putting it into play in the actual background. So now let's go ahead and do that. So for now, I'll make it the background of all of the layers. That's not really correct. And let's see what happened to it. Oh, look at that, it's huge. So once again, my shortcut, this time for height, Command Option Shift G. And in fact, for this first shot, I can even go at about half of that because we only see it in the upper half of the shot. So let's try something like that. Now look at how out of focus she is right there, which means this background is too much in focus. So I could go back and adjust the individual layers, but let's say that they're good relative to one another. And I'm just going to add another box blur here. We'll go with the 2 iteration look. And let's just get it looking kind of right. So if she's that blurry, I think it's got to be about like that at least. And we're not going to be using the same any settings for the second one, so I could go ahead and split the layer here. Why don't I just do that? Command-Shift-D splits the layer, and let's just focus on the area that we have as a work area and preview that. I'm going to go to half res. I can have a shortcut for that, Command-Shift-J. And again, I'll do every other frame because I'm just judging the animation and kind of the overall look right now. That gives me enough to just judge it. Okay, well, I love the fact that the clouds are going by up here, but I don't like that everything looks way too close to camera down here. So let's fix that. If I zoom out, notice that the overall layer is, we're using maybe about 60% of it. So I'll just keep that in mind. So in the pre-comp, let's see. One way I could do this, even though I carefully made these layers the exact width, is to scale them down. And over here, you know, I can also, what I can do is lock this view. And then by locking that view, I can go into the other comp, keep that view up, and continue adjusting it. I don't get real-time interaction, so I have to kind of make adjustments and then wait to see what they look like. But I'm just getting my middle ground so that it's nice and visible there. Let's just see how it looks elsewhere. Yeah, to kind of keep the proportions, I think that I need the foreground a bit bigger. That's going to be better, I think. Let's even try it full 100%. Okay. And we don't get to see every last little bit of detail in this beautiful background, but that's sometimes the price you pay to get the overall look that you want. It can be hard sometimes when you work with other artists and you know they've created something really awesome and you're either only using a little piece of it, or you're blurring it out in the background, or you're blowing it out because it's hot and sunlit, or you're making it all shadowy and dark and you can't see all that loving detail that they put into it. But the artists that I worked with that are really good don't care. What they want is for it to look awesome in the end result. And to be honest, to me, their stuff usually looks better if you sell it and you make people appreciate it that much more using their imagination. It still looks a little jumbly, so I think the foreground is a little too big. So I'm going to dial it back. And I'm also going to move it down to distinguish it from what's behind it, which I will move up. And this may not look right in the other shot, but guess what? We can fudge it all we want. Now I'm getting some parallax happening, but I still think it would be better if this weren't quite so closed in on the background. So let me see if I can figure out how to achieve that. So what I like is that we're getting that little bit of sky up there. So let me just duplicate the background layer and then scale the one that's forward down to about 66%. And now again, I'm using these slider controls to position it because I can't directly drag it when I'm looking at a separate comp. Okay, well, somewhere in there is kind of what I want. I might have to slide everything down now, but that's looking a little bit more like it. And again, we're going to have 2 more shots where we get to see more of the background. So in a way, having it more obscured in the shot is actually creating a little bit of drama, a little tension, if you will. Let's just see if that's, ooh, yeah, that's really starting to look pretty nice.